never smoke the dizzy, but we can always share some disease. It's just a cup in time. This song doesn't have to run. Life's all of us, not every moment we can be feeling fine. I wanna share a moment, just a second if you will, maybe even a cup of thrill. We could share this performance. It's tea time, come sit with me.
Well, welcome guys. Miss Liz in the house, and I have the incredible Brian Koehn in the background, and we're going to talk about corrections and systems and all that good stuff. And we're also going to talk about his tea tonight, and the tea that we're serving tonight is Purpose, People, and Outcomes. That is the tea we are serving tonight in this house. But before we get started, you guys know how Miss Liz rolls. Get over to those platforms: Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, all those good platforms, and get to the podcast apps, Spotify, Listen Notes, Podbean, all those good ones. And check out babyboomers.org. They are partnered with Miss Liz, and we get those out there to all of the baby boomers out there. So check that out as well. So let's get started with a disclaimer and then a beautiful intro. And then we're going to get Brian in here and we're going to spill his tea. And his tea is Purpose, People, and Outcomes. That's what we'll be serving tonight on Tea Time with Miss Liz. Disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live show. Miss Liz's Tea Time is a global platform dedicating to sharing real-life stories, diverse perspectives, and meaningful conversations that inspire awareness, healing, and connection. I'm Miss Liz is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment during the live broadcast, please grant StreamYard permission to display your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that all the content brought forward during any Tea Time show is presented in good faith. However, discussions may include opinions, beliefs, and perspectives that do not necessarily represent the views of Miss Liz or the Tea Time platform. Information shared by guests is based on their own experiences and is perceived to be accurate at the given time of airing. All guests, viewers, and participants are responsible for using their own good judgment when considering any action or decision that may relate to these discussions. Some episodes may cover sensitive topics, including but not limited to trauma, abuse, grief, mental health, and other emotionally triggering subjects. Listeners and viewers' discretion is strongly advised. Tea Time with Miss Liz is an open discussion forum designed to offer insight, inspire awareness, and create connection. It is not a substitute for professional, medical, legal, or therapeutical advice. If you require professional support, please seek assistance from qualified professionals or trusted resources in your area. If you have any questions regarding this disclaimer or the content of the discussion, you are welcome to contact me, aka Miss Liz, directly at my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com or visit my link tree at Miss Liz's Tea Time. By choosing to participate in, comment on, or view these live shows, you acknowledge and accept this disclaimer. Your participation is entirely voluntary. I, Miss Liz, welcomes you to join the conversation with an open heart, and if at any time you feel this platform is not right for you, I respect your wishes and decision and welcome you back whenever you are ready. Tea Time with Miss Liz is serving truth and awareness one cup at a time. Well, welcome back to Tea Time with Miss Liz, where we don't just talk about change, we sit in the reality of what it actually takes to create it. Tonight's guest brings a perspective that most people don't see and many don't fully understand. Please join me in welcoming Brian Koehn, CEO of Social Purpose Corrections, the United States' first outcomes-based nonprofit correctional operation focused on transforming prison cultures from the inside out. Brian's journey didn't start in a reform system. It started inside the traditional one. He's seen what works, what quietly breaks, and what people often choose not to acknowledge. His leadership has been shaped through real experiences, working his way through roles from warden to senior security leadership, leading change in facilities across the country. His approach is not about theory, it is about people. Staff first, residents alongside them, leadership included, whether it's comfortable or not. He believes something many people struggle to accept, that safety, dignity, accountability, and rehabilitation can exist together. His T says it clearly: purpose, people, outcome. And his story reflects it even deeper: strength and purpose. Always faithful, relentless, resilience. So grab your cup and lean in. Tonight's Tea Time is about leadership, systems, and what it really takes to create change when the stakes are real. And let me get Brian in here and let's spill some tea. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Miss Liz. Appreciate you being here. Yeah, I'm excited to have a conversation today.
Well, Brian, I'm going to take you down my first rabbit hole that I take all my guests down so we can get to know you a little bit better. Who was Brian as a little guy and who is Brian now?
Brian as a little guy. I grew up in Minnesota, not too far from the Canadian border. I know you're from Canada. I grew up, a little bit north of Minneapolis in a very blue collar town and very blue collar, expectations. And I grew up there. And once I got out of high school, I wasn't sure what I want to do with life. Where do I go? What do I do? I was a little bit lost, to be quite frank. And I decided to serve our country, and I went to the local military recruiter's office and said, "Who are you?" And they said, "We're the Navy, and you should come here." And they said, "We're the Army, you should come here." And I went to the Marine Corps office, and they said, "Well, we're the Marines, we're the best." And I said, like that, and joined the Marines, and that started my journey.
And how long were you in the Marines for, Brian?
4 years, 6 months.
Wow. So, Brian, before we get started, I'm going to talk about the tree because we know about the tree, but we're going to get my listeners to know a little bit about the tree. But I'm going to pull up your logo and just to share a little bit, and then we're going to get into what social purpose corrections is. So let me just pull up the tree so people can see the tree we're going to talk about. But if you want to point to the tree that's in your office.
Right there, if you can see it. Yeah, the tree that's on my wall. Yeah, it's when I founded Social Purpose Corrections, I was leaving the warden's chair. Wardens aren't exactly known as being the most innovative, creative when it comes to branding and marketing. It wasn't exactly a skill set you have when you're running a prison. It's how do we connect with the message? How do we connect with the values of our organization? And I was really struggling. I was like the phoenix, born from the ashes kind of thing. And I was like, that's everywhere. And then it hit me. The tree that's on the wall was made by my mother years ago. She's a very craft person. And I started to connect the values of social purpose corrections with the tree, the roots, the strong roots of growth. Without roots, you can't grow. The trunk of the tree, the strength of the tree that can weather the wind and the storms. And then the growth, the leaves, and the seasons. You have the fall and the winter when you lose your leaves, but then you're reborn again, or you grow again in the spring. And I was like, now the tree is kind of a standard symbol too, as far as branding goes. But I really connected with it, and the connection was not because I thought, hey, the tree is great. I connected because I was looking at the tree on the wall, which is, a reflection of my mother's love for me, and she made that. And I was like, there you go. And that was the beginning of how do we connect our values within social purpose corrections to a branding or to a visual relation to what we do. So that's where the tree came from.
Yeah, let's talk about that because I want to get into the mission, the purpose, and the values of social purpose corrections.
Yeah. Would it be, I'd like to talk about why SPC first. Would you mind if I go down that path?
Yeah, let's go down that path.
Yeah. It's, when I was discharged from the Marines, I went back to my hometown and went to college at a local state university in Minnesota. And, I was interested in law enforcement at the time. And so I went through criminal justice without really understanding what that meant. And when I completed the degree, I needed to go find a job. And, in that interim, I was interested in law enforcement, like many Marines naturally kind of gravitate to. And there's this independent private prison in Western Minnesota that was opening. And I was like, well, I never wanted to work in a prison, but I need a job until I can figure all this out. And so I was connected. My brother at the time was engaged to the daughter of the mayor of the town who founded the prison, and so I made a call and sent in my resume and application, and I was immediately hired as a supervisor. So I was like, as a kid, I don't think anyone on your podcast listening right now, when you grow up as a kid, what do you want to be when you get older? I want to be a firefighter. I want to be a police officer. I want to be an attorney. I want to whatever they want. Nobody grows up saying, I want to work in a prison. That's just not something that you do as youth. And neither did I. And I wasn't really thrilled about the idea of working in a prison, but I was like, it was an independent city economic development project. So it was in Appleton, Minnesota. So very remote, very rural, and struggling as a town, losing people to the bigger cities, and, the small farms were shutting down, and they were looking for a way to grow the economy. And so they built a 516 bed prison, of all things.
Ooh.
And so I took the job. They offered me a immediate supervisor. So, you have correctional officer, then you have correctional sergeant. So I was hired as a sergeant because of my military experience. And that started a journey in corrections, a journey I never anticipated that happened again. But once I got there, I was intrigued. It was very military. Clearly, I was, Marine Corps is there's a relation and connection there. By the way, it turns into be part of the root problem of corrections. But the reality is I connected to it. It's a people business. I mean, really, there isn't much, maybe education, but when you look at people businesses, you have corrections, you have the staff, that run the facilities, and you have the incarcerated that are incarcerated within those facilities. Everything you do is about people. And so I was attracted to it. And then one of the big private prison companies bought that facility. And so, and then I went from being an independent city-owned prison to being part of a 65 prison organization. Just so your listeners understand, in the United States, of the 2 million people we incarcerate, which is another issue, the 92% of the 2 million are run by government corrections, and then 8% are run by for-profit private prisons. I worked on the 8% side. And so I promoted quickly. I was the head of security of 65 prisons, the first head of security of this company for 65 prisons, overall security. And then I took my first of 5 warden jobs. And so in the U.S. and private prisons, you contract with the government to provide a service, which is to manage detainees or incarcerated people for these different jurisdictions. And so I ran prisons for the Bureau of Prisons, the largest system in the United States. I ran prisons for 6 states, U.S. Marshals, immigration detention, a couple small jails. So, it's kind of the understanding of 16 different jurisdictions. So I learned cultures from 16 different states, federal agencies, and local agencies about how we do corrections in the United States. And in the United States, and I'm pretty safe to saying, in the world for that matter, the corrections is done a certain way. It's been that way for, in some cases, hundreds of years. Yeah. And I call it the Kool-Aid. So you're taught how to do corrections the way corrections has always been done. You're in this box. This is corrections. If you're good at what's inside that box, you can get promoted. If you think outside that box, you're probably not going to be very well received. Well, I wasn't a very in the box kind of guy.
I didn't think so.
And in the warden seat, you're looking at the challenges of running a prison, which is like running a city. You have your own police department, your own fire department, your own public works, your own high school, your own hospital, your own massive cafeteria, all within this small space because it's a secure facility. And the better I started understanding the outcomes of corrections, I mean, what are we producing? Recidivism, 2/3 fail rate. I mean, think about that for a second. 2/3 of the people that are incarcerated come back. Well, that's not good. There's when you look at organizations, whether it's government or not, there's a return on the investment that you put into it. And to have failure 2/3 of the time based off of your product, I mean, in this case, it's human beings and helping them, after a while, I was like, well, this doesn't work. The lifespan of a correctional officer in the United States is 59 years old. The average of a male in the United States is 76. corrections
Wow.
kills you. I mean, the job kills you. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. Number one divorce rate of any occupation, correctional officer. Number one suicide rate of any occupation, correctional officer. Lifespan, 17 years less than general society. Folks, this doesn't work. And I became more and more frustrated sitting in that warden's chair, and people perceive wardens, you have all this power and authority. Well, you do and you don't. How do you affect culture change to change those outcomes? The lifespan, I mean, and that's just the staff. Incarcerated, the lifespan is significantly lower too. But how do we help people become better? How do we help people go back to society and be successful, be fathers, mothers, pay their taxes, participate in their faith-based or the faith organizations to become a member of society, but we're really not giving them a fair chance because we're warehousing human beings. And we're very good at it. And that's what the system is designed to do. And that's what it does well. So I'll pause there because I could talk for a very long time on corrections. And I forget your original question, to be honest with you.
No. It's all good. You're getting good information out there, and the listeners are enjoying what we're getting out there. I just want to go back to the 92% government prisons and the 8% private prisons, because maybe people don't know that is how it works. Did you work only in the private?
I did. Yeah, there's significance to that. And I know there's pretty strong feelings on for-profit corrections and not, and I'm not necessarily here to go into that. But the point being in private corrections as different than government corrections, as a warden in private corrections, you have the same responsibility as government corrections to run your institution. But you also have the responsibility of understanding root cause, symptoms, and solutions because you're a for-profit company. The more efficient you run, the more obviously revenue that's generated. The violence is expensive, so you don't want violence. You take actions to stop that stuff from happening. And part of the challenge is private prisons in the United States are based off of what's called heads and beds. They're paid by the numbers of people incarcerated. So although I worked for the private prisons for a very long time, the incentive of how they're compensated is off. I mean, if you're in a traditionally government function of corrections, you need to provide value. It's my opinion that if you're a contract agency, which our nonprofit now is contract, it's a different kind of contract. We're not private, but you should be paid by your ability to help society, not by your ability to hold people. And so, the private sector is supposed to bring innovation to solutions. That's part of the value of having private sector in a traditional government area. And so, I saw the money being generated through these private prison contracts, being fed to the corporations and in many cases to Wall Street. And that's not where the benefits of the efficiency should go. And so I believe that we should have an outcomes-based model where people, if you're not government, you're in the correction space, you shouldn't be there unless you're providing value. And that value has to do with returning people to society to be successful. I mean, that's really the end result. Reduce recidivism, decarcerate our system. We have too many people in there as it is, sometimes longer than they probably need to be. And how do we help move that needle, move that values-based concept to helping human beings. I'm not even going to get into the fact that once you're a felon and you're released from prison, the felon tag that's associated to it, all the 10,000 challenges that come with that stop you from being successful. So, I'm not here making excuses for people, because accountability is important. Yeah. But we need to give people a fair chance. In many ways, the system just does not do that.
Well, and it holds that stigma on you for a long haul. Like, once you do your time, when you come out, you're still doing time because you're not able to get housing or get a job or get the education. So how does social purpose corrections help people with all of these things?
Well, I mentioned the box earlier. We're outside the box, and in some cases way outside the box. But if we're gonna help our government leaders, because corrections is a government responsibility, if we're gonna help our government leaders bring innovation, to change the culture of how we do corrections, then we need to think outside that box, and that's who we are. Most of our team are operators like myself, several of them were wardens, some of them more experienced than me, who ran facilities, but really had ethical challenges with the outcomes and why we did what we did. Our team's full of activists, impacted people that did time, that were incarcerated. And it's how do you bring all these different ideas, experiences to the table, along with the advocates, along with the legislators, along with the governor's office, along with the government decision makers, on helping them change their outcomes or move their outcomes in a better direction of decarcerating. It's a term I use, but to give people a fair chance at free life and success. When people get out, with $50 in a bus ticket and no education, and then we're surprised when they harm society again. I mean, what do you think is going to happen? Desperate people make desperate choices, and we have to move away from the desperate people philosophy. We need to educate our legislators, because in many cases they don't give the Department of Corrections the budgets they need to be successful. Corrections is very expensive, by the way. It's like the third largest line item of any state in the United States. So yeah, it's our model is more based off of, we're a resource for government leaders, number one. We're a collaboration of nonprofits and socially responsible for-profits, with some caution there. We don't want to incentivize decisions based off of money. And really that's one of the problems in the United States, is decisions are made based off of profit, whether it's on the government side or the non-government side, the private prison side. So, in our model it's not profit based. Our model is humanities based. How do we change this without making decisions based off of making somebody money?
Right. People over certain systems and services.
Right.
So we have a couple of comments and questions that are coming in that I just want to get out to you, Brian, and then we'll get into a little bit more information that I have here that I want to get out. The people over system mindset is so powerful. We had a question here that I popped up while you were talking about transformation. Just want to go back up. Let me see where it is. This conversation is so powerful. How can systems really shift mindset long term?
Excellent question. I mean, one of the frustrations that we deal with pretty consistently is corrections is one of those parts of society that people just don't think about. You won't find a governor running off a corrections reform platform, because they don't want to use their political capital on something like prisons, as an example. And how do we educate general society? How do we educate the voters on what they're paying for? I live in the state of Arizona. I think it's up to $1.8 billion a year now, the third largest budget line item in Arizona, and they just don't see things changing. And it's not necessarily because of the leadership in Arizona, because I can tell you the current director of corrections has the right value systems, has been successful in other systems before, and he's trying to make changes. It's just hard to change that pendulum. And the perception of general society is, well, these are where bad people go. Why are we paying attention to them? They don't really need more resources than they have, and they just don't think about it. But the reality is the outcomes of corrections is affecting everybody in society. And so, I mean, how do we educate the voters in many ways? Hey, this is important to you. Number one, we're creating more victims when we're releasing people out of prison or jails completely unprepared. Number two, these are human beings. All human beings, make mistakes. We all have, and we don't want to all be judged by our worst moments in life. And in many ways, that's what we do in corrections in the world, more or less the United States, is how do we help them be prepared for success in society, to be successful in society, to take care of their children, to pay tax, like I said, all the things associated to it. But the generals, the tax-paying voter doesn't understand that. They see the high-profile so-and-so was killed, or so-and-so was a sexual assault, or so-and-so, and they see these high-profile cases out there, and then they make a judgment that everybody in prison is like that. And that's not even close to the case. Most of the people in prisons are people that just made bad choices, but they're not bad people. Now, there is an exception, folks that probably need to be in prison the rest of their life. They're that damaged. But the reality is that's by far the minority. The majority deserve a fair chance. And I went on soapbox there, and I hope I answered the question. But I think that's one of the challenges is the voter, the person that influenced the politics influences corrections and its outcomes. We need to educate society about what corrections is and what they're paying for, and they're not getting a return on that investment.
Why do you think, Brian, that we're not putting people first? Like, why are we so hard on just accepting that they're going to come back? 8 out of 10 are going to come back.
Well, most don't know that. I think that the political narrative, in many ways, nobody wins an election on soft on crime. It doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Independent, or Republican. You are not going to win on a soft on crime platform. And so the converse of that is you run an accountability platform. Emotionally, that kind of makes sense. Okay, we all have the same rules. I don't break the law. If I did, then I would be held accountable too. You break the law, therefore you should be accountable. But they don't understand that many of the folks that are in incarceration never really had a fair chance in the first place. And I can give examples of that if your listeners want to hear to it. But it's and I don't excuse. There's many people come from some of these poor communities that don't cause crime, but there's also a good number that do cause crime. And so accountability is important, but at number one, it needs to be measured accountability. Giving somebody 20 years for selling a bag of marijuana, seriously, you can't correct that behavior in less than 20 years. And as a general taxpayer, you're paying for that punishment for an extended period of time when it's not really necessary. The message you could get across, number one, in either a different way than prison, or obviously something that's less than putting somebody away for a very long time. That's quite expensive to all of us. But it's hard when the politicians rule, policy, and hard on crime wins, soft on crime loses. Nobody wants to be perceived that way. So you see a lot of legislation that's based off of, well, let's increase the sentence. Let's increase the time for X offense from 10 years to 15 years. People see that now I'm tough because I'm hard on crime, when all reality that's worse for crime, because all we're doing is they're more frustrated. They're learning crime skills inside of incarceration that are not helpful to a productive life, and then they're released worse than they came in because, again, we're warehousing people, and that's just quite not helpful. So. So yeah, it's how do we work together as a society to make this important? Because until we make it important, the politicians aren't going to care. And if the politicians aren't supporting corrections and reform, then we're just not going to see a lot of effort to modify or change the system. And that's where we come in as a nonprofit, is to educate folks. Number one, because we worked in prisons for a very long time, but number two, we're bringing innovative ideas to solve the problem and the cost. And a lot of the motivation for politicians, no matter which side, is the exorbitant cost of corrections. How do we minimize that? How do we reduce that? Well, we do that by helping human beings. I mean, it's not a difficult solution.
Well, we have a question here for you, Brian, is what motivated you the most to get into doing what you're doing today?
I grew up in corrections with the mindset that people that go to prison should be accountable for their crime. I don't hurt people, therefore, if you do, you should. And I bought into I call it the Kool-Aid mindset. This is how we do corrections in the United States, and people drink the Kool-Aid. Well, as a young corrections person, I was taught in the academy, this is how we do corrections. It's very us, the staff, versus the incarcerated. To use a military example, it's us versus the enemy, which is the incarcerated. And I can give you all kinds of examples of how that culture exists today in the United States. And part of that culture is because security staff are compromised or all staff can be compromised by incarcerated people to bring in drugs, guns, fall in love, have sex, things that you can't do inside of a prison. And so over the years in the history of corrections, they keep separating the staff from the incarcerated folks, the residents. And that division as gets wider and wider is completely counterproductive, because as a warden, I'm watching this. I'm running very difficult, violent prisons. I was successful at changing cultures, which gave me confidence. But I've learned quickly that it's separating, as an example, separating the staff from the residents intentionally is counterproductive, because we're not helping the residents become better people. All we're doing is the struggle internally within the prisons every day, us versus them, us versus them.
Yeah.
So a staff member, for example, if they talk to an incarcerated person for more than 5 minutes, well, they're potentially compromised, and they can put under investigation for that, which sounds maybe silly to your listeners. But in a corrections world, it's like, well, we got to make sure that staff doesn't get compromised, because if they bring in guns and drugs, that's going to make everybody less safe, which is true. And then on the incarcerated side, the politics, the race politics with incarceration within the United States, and I think you'll see this beyond, is the white inmates associate with white inmates, black inmates associated with black inmates, the Hispanics associated with Hispanics. Each one of those races has their own leaders. Each one of those leaders has a power system and control system within that institution. One might bring in, work to bring in drug. One focuses on making homemade alcohol inside, which is possible. One is focused on tobacco, because tobacco is typically not allowed in U.S. corrections. And then, so now you have the power struggle within the incarcerated ranks, and none of that is helpful for helping human beings be better. And then, so you have all this dynamics going on, and everything's firefighting mode and fixing problems. And this went bad. What are we going to do to change it? And they keep making it more and more secure, and more distance between the staff and the residents and their families, for that matter, because of how it's operated. So, it's all that saying is none of that's helpful, and none of that is necessarily has to happen the way that our culture requires it to happen within the United States. And that's where, as a warden, when I really started to question the whys, why do we make sure we separate the staff from the incarcerated? Okay, so because they don't get compromised. But we do understand that people come to corrections in many ways because they want to help human beings. I mean, that's why they take the job. But then you get into the job, and in the academy, they say, oh, this is what's going to happen, and this is how it's going to work, and you feel good about it. But then you get on the floor, and the experienced staff tell you, well, that's not how we do it here. This is what's going to happen. And then they separate, and so the more I saw the root cause of the problems, and as an operator, I actually was effective in helping fix that and changing cultures, the more confidence I had that I can help our government leaders do better. And which is part of, the more frustrated I became, the more attuned I became to the problem. As an example, when you grow up in corrections within the box, no one talks about recidivism. If you're a correctional officer, that's not something you talk about. It's, did you get assaulted today? What happened in G-Pod? What's the, which staff member is sleeping with what staff member? And these are the kind of problems that you're dealing with. And I'm looking at it and going, well, none of this is helpful. Yeah. If we understand our end in mind here, our culture, which is values connected to behavior. If our values are to help human beings, then what behavior exists within this organization to help human beings? Still being safe and secure. You just can't open up the prison and let people do what they want. But there's a way to merge that together, and I think that's grew more and more. Part for me is faith. I can't in good conscience be part of a system that I know is harming human beings, whether it's the lifespan of a staff member or an incarcerated person having a fair chance of getting out. And so that started that journey of me questioning the outcomes and taking that step off that ledge in a world knowing that there's a good chance that we're going to fail, but somebody has to bring a new solution forward. And so that's part of the journey.
Brian, in your time being a warden, were there people where you were like, they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time? And like, what are they doing here?
As a warden, you typically, as a staff member in general, you don't look at people's crimes. You do that on purpose. All of us have bias on what people do to other human beings. And it's pretty common that you intentionally don't know what a person's crime is because you don't want to know. Because when you do know, and if it's something that triggers you personally or otherwise, you treat them differently. And you can't do that. Everyone's got to be treated the same, no matter what their crime is. And so, although as a warden, I mean, I had to, in some cases, know what they've done, but I can tell you it was very limited, and it was only if I had to understand what that person did, either in order to help them or to better understand, why, they are acting and behaving the way that they are. I think one of the things important for your listeners to understand too is, I mean, we look at corrections as a whole. I mean, what is corrections? It's the melting pot of our society's challenges. The prisons are the mental health hospitals in the United States. They closed them down in the 80s. I mean, so if you have a severely mental health a person, they send them to prison, and now you have to deal with them, but you don't have the resources to handle that kind of person that needs that kind of help. It's homelessness, it's inequality, it's poverty, it's the addictions. It's where people that have severe addictions, whether it's alcohol, drugs, whatever, gambling, what have you, they eventually will end up in prison if they don't address those addictions. So you take all of society's challenges and you put them in one place, which is the end of the road, and that's prisons. And then you don't give the wardens and staff and leadership resources to help those folks, and then we wonder why we're not successful. And that has to change. And so that's some of the challenges associated with when we talk about changing culture, and there is an answer there. So I don't want to give this, holy cow, this is hopeless. No, it's not. It's just we have to get outside the box. Yeah.
And we got to start treating people like human beings.
Absolutely. And understand that, what put people in prison doesn't go away because they're in prison. I mean, those behaviors still exist, but you have to have a culture that reinforcing that those behaviors are not acceptable, that they're not part of how we transition into society from incarceration. And you have to set up a culture internally that's supportive of change. Punishment is the restriction of freedom. It's not our job in corrections to punish people. It's our job in corrections to help people. Punishment is the restriction of freedom. They can't go home. They can't get on the internet. They can't hug their kids, and tell them a story, a good night. That is punishment. And so, we need to understand that let's move away from a punishment model more to a treatment model or a helping model, so that these people that we incarcerate, these human beings, can go home successful.
Well, we have a question here about leadership that I just want to bring up is, how can leadership change culture inside correctional facilities?
Leadership in corrections is tested at the warden's level. Just to be quite frank, it's the wardens, assistant wardens, chief of security, shift supervisors. These are the higher levels. Then you have the medical leadership, and so on. So if a leader has the mindset of corrections has been this way for the last 200 years because it needs to be this way. Corrections is this way because that's what I was taught to do. Corrections is this way because that's what I was cultured my whole life. And I wasn't allowed to challenge it, or I don't want to challenge it. A lot of wardens, it's their last job before retirement too. And I think, and I say that as a general overview, there are really good leaders that will push back on the system, understanding that the outcomes are awful. And so the leadership is key in that culture. In corrections, and I say this in general, there's an infinite mindset, where this isn't about just today. This is about making a better system for the generations past us. And a lot of people don't think that way. It's just their crisis management, because that's what prisons are. It's crisis on it every day. There's constant things going wrong. And so when you get into this crisis management as a leader, and you can't move the culture forward. So it takes leadership to say, okay, step back. Let's look at the holistic problem here. And then how do we move forward together? And that's a top down, but it's also bottom up. The correctional officers and the incarcerated folks have to be listened to. They have ideas. They live in those facilities on how to make them better. But if you don't listen to them, truly listen and act on their suggestions, as a leader, you can't expect the culture to change. And so leadership is key. Corrections also is quite famous for congratulations, you're promoted, figure it out. Wow. It's a model where you're a correctional officer, you do well, you get promoted to the first level supervisor. but you won't go to leadership training for 3-6 months, a year. And how many people are you going to damage in that time frame if you don't have the appropriate skill sets to lead people? And then corrections also promotes people internally. So if I'm a correctional officer and I did things wrong, and now I'm your supervisor and I'm telling you what to do, they will quickly go back to him and say, that's not what you did. And so you have this challenge of internal within that culture of how do we change that leadership impact on those people. So it's a much more dynamic problem and advantage than what I'm able to say right now, with the time we have. But the point being, to your listener's question, yes, leadership is critical to changing the culture, but we got to get that leader outside of the box. We got that leader to see the root cause of the problem, quit fixing symptoms, and address that root cause. Listen to your people, and you'd be amazed of what you can do.
Well, it kind of goes back to the tree, right? The root cause, finding what is causing all of this disruption. And like you said, there's so much mindset, and prisons have been told this is the way it works. Don't try and change it. Don't come in here and try and change this house. This is the way the house runs. With the government prisons, do you have any feedback on that for my listeners? Like with the outcomes and all that, are they looking at bettering stuff, or are they just set in their ways?
No, they're constant. There's some excellent leaders in our country, but going back to the leadership question, the directors of corrections in the United States for the states are appointed by the governor of that state. And so the average tenure of a director of corrections in the US is 2.5 years. So as you can imagine, how effective are you going to be in changing culture when the leadership of your organization changes every 2.5 years on average? And whether that's something that goes bad and the governor replaces you, or there's an election and the governor changes and they always bring in their person. So the continuity of leadership is always challenged, which is a root cause to some of the problems. So you have a very, very innovative leader that comes in that understands the challenges with the culture, is very programmatic, is very purpose-driven for the staff. If they want to do what's right, they start, and the analogy I like to use for government corrections is they're driving an aircraft carrier. Sorry to use a military analogy, but it takes forever to turn an aircraft carrier. They're huge, they're complicated. Well, corrections is an aircraft carrier. It takes forever to get it to change. And then when they start to get it to change, well, then they're replaced. Well, the person coming in, talking about the infinite mindset, sees, well, I want to do it my way. Well, then, so they want to change what the last director did. And so now this aircraft carrier is starting to turn back to the other way. And if that person is a traditional corrections person, the way it's always been done, they're not want the aircraft. It's going to go straight. Yeah. They want that aircraft carrier going the way it's always gone, because that's what they know. That's what they expect. And so that's part of the challenge. I've seen so many good, passionate leaders that come into those positions. I want to do what's right. We're going to change the culture. And then 2.5, 3 years later, they're gone and nothing's really changed. And then the next person comes in and says, I want to change the culture. We're going to do X, Y, and Z, and then 2.5 years, and then the staff after a while, they're like, yeah, right.
Nobody's changing nothing.
Yeah, change. It's not because we have bad leaders. We have great leaders. It's just that the bureaucracy of the system on changing, and turning that aircraft carrier is so difficult. And then they just don't have the time in many cases. Even if you have 5 years in the job, 7 years in the job, you're trying to turn a culture where the correctional officers like it the way it was. So you can, from the leadership, you can say, we're going to do something different. But if they passively push back, which happens, that's part of the problem of steering that aircraft carrier. It's getting everybody to buy in that these are human beings. They need to be treated with respect and dignity. The staff have to come first, because the staff are the ones that engage with the incarcerated on a day-to-day basis. If they're unwell, lifespan of 59 years old, if they don't see purpose in their job, or they're not allowed to have purpose in their job because of the culture, well, nothing ever changes. And so that's one of the challenges of the government corrections is the bureaucracy of it. If the governor says, hey, director of corrections, your job is to keep me off the radar. I don't want I don't want anything in the funny pages. I don't want anything that's looked negative on me. I'm going to run again for office next time. I just want you to keep corrections quiet. Well, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
Because then the person who works for the governor, that's assigned by the governor, is going to do what the governor tells them to do. The aircraft carrier goes straight. There's no changing. There's no turning. And so those are some of the challenges I think associated, at least within the U.S. I can't imagine it's a ton different outside the U.S. On how do we bring around change, within corrections.
We have a question here. How can society support individuals after incarceration?
Wow, that's a huge question. Philosophically, we have to give them a fair chance. I mean, there's research out there, and I've read, this has been a while, but there's research out there saying there's 10,000 reasons why somebody can't be successful. Because once you're a felon, you're punished for the rest of your life. You as a felon, you can't get an apartment because they'll do a background check on you, and if you have a felony record, no matter what it is, you can be immediately denied. You can't use Airbnbs if you're a felon. You can't. The job seekers, there's always that box that says, were you ever convicted of a crime? And now a lot of states are going to ban the box, which is important. But the reality is people have this perception that if you did time, if you were incarcerated, you are not a good employee. But all the research shows the opposite. They're more loyal, they're more dedicated, they're more devoted, they're more disciplined, and they buy into the company's values because they gave them a chance. But there's all these different reasons. If you're released out of prison with $50 in a bus ticket, but you have to go to probation and parole, and you have to pay for your drug tests, and they cost $30. I mean, it's just the system is designed. Or you don't have a driver's license because you lost it because you had fines, fees, associated, but you don't have any money. But now you don't have a driver's license. So now, in order to get to an interview to have a job, I don't have any money for an Uber. I definitely don't have a car, or I get access to a car. I drive without a license. You get revoked. I mean, it's just, I could go on and on.
Yeah.
I would
it's made to fail, right?
If your listeners ever get a chance to go to a reentry simulation, they do them all across, I know, the United States, and I think outside of that. It's based off of the challenges associated to once you're released from prison. Go through it. I went through the last one. I think I got put in jail 3 times.
Wow.
It's not like I don't know what to do. I've been immersed in the system for my whole career. Things happened to me in the simulation that I didn't have control over, that put me in jail and violated me, just because of the way the system is designed. So if any of your listeners are interested, find a reentry simulation. It's 4 or 5 hours. Go attend that. That'll give you a new appreciation for the challenges associated to being released from the system.
So Brian, let's talk quickly about social. I just went blank. Sorry.
Social purpose corrections.
Yes,
Yeah.
I just did a blank. Sorry, guys.
Nope.
So social purpose correction. And let's talk about how you help the incarcerated. Is it after they come out or during the process of the release, parole, all that stuff?
We are designed to be a tool for a government leader's toolbox on fixing problems. So there are 3 tiers to our model. Number 1 is to operate full prisons and jails as an outcomes-based nonprofit. So we're only compensated when we help society. Number 2 is to operate medical departments within corrections. Half of U.S. corrections is run by for-profit medical companies. And I won't say that they're all bad, but I will say that they have a really terrible reputation. And then the last thing is consulting. And when I say that, I hesitate because the word consultant is a trigger for me. Having been a warden, consultants would show up and tell me how to do things and walk out of the door, and I'll be looking at it like, you have no idea what you're talking about. We are consultants with skin in the game. Our number 1 priority right now, when you look at root cause, is to help staff be well. If you can't retain staff, if you have 40% officer vacancies, that means programs doesn't happen, rec doesn't happen, visits don't happen because they pull security into the critical posts. And that's happening across our country right now because there's not a lot of purpose to the job, and the younger generation doesn't want to work there. And so until we can fix the staffing crisis right now, recidivism, we're not going to have a chance of impacting that. And so a lot of our consulting is how do we bring wellness to the staff? How do we help a warden adjust their culture to be supportive of purpose for the people who work there? The number one recruiter in corrections is the officer. They tell their friends, I love my job, or they tell their friends, I hate my job. If they love their job, you're not going to have a problem, staffing your facility. If they're going home and saying, I don't like what I'm doing, well, then people just don't work there. I'm being a little generic there, but the reality is on the consulting side, we're here with skin in the game to help government leaders. And we have some examples of outside the U.S. of how we're helping with international corrections too. But how do we help leaders adjust their culture or bring strategies forward that are pro-social, proactive, and good for changing and moving that aircraft carrier?
So Brian, how do we get ahead with your systems and services? Do you have events that people can attend? Are you only working through the prisons or outside of the prisons? How can people find out more?
Well, we go wherever the government leaders ask us to be quite frank. What's their pain point? And are they interested in innovation or are they not? So, we're seeing some traction on full detention operations. We're seeing some traction on correctional officer retention strategies. We're very invested in, there's 3 nonprofit prisons in the world. There's one in Belize, one in South Korea, and a larger organization out of Brazil. They're nonprofit facilities that actually operate full detention centers. Brazil, I think, has 69 of them. But the Belize Central Prison is a faith-based nonprofit. There's the most successful facility in South Korea on managing recidivism is a faith-based nonprofit. Their values, although they're all faith supportive, their values are very Christian faith centered, but then the staff act and perform based off of the values of that facility. And so it's just a whole different feel and a whole different environment. And we're trying to bring some of that to the US, and there are examples of nonprofit prisons within the world that are quite successful in addressing recidivism. Like government ran it with 70% when they're running it at 17%. Kind of success. I mean, it's significant.
Wow. Huge number difference too. Mm-hmm. So Brian, do you want to talk a little bit about how much it costs to fund prisons in the US? Because I got a number here, 81 billion annual cost for US corrections.
That's a little outdated. I think it's a little less now, just because some states have reduced their numbers of incarcerated, but still the United States is, and this is the Marine talking in me, but the United States, a country that I would gladly fight for today, but I can't be okay with the fact that we're number one at incarcerating our people. If there's any metrics, I mean, the United States should be number one for many things. Education should be number one, and we're not even close. But we are number one in incarceration. There's a disconnect there. And so. I think it's, again, back to your point earlier, it's how do we educate people to get them to engage with their decision makers, with their leaders on supporting people who want to move the aircraft carrier and turn it relatively quick. I got distracted there, so I hope I answered your question.
No, that's good. We're both spacing out.
Yeah.
Brian, I want to talk to you about the mission, purpose, and values of social purpose corrections. How did you get that all together, and how many team members do you have, and all of that good stuff? So I did check on the website. If people want to check out the website, just maybe give out a show for the website so people can check out a little bit more. I just want my listeners to understand a little bit more of what we're talking about tonight.
Well, we are, as you can imagine, we're challenging a system, and we're the first of our kind in the United States, and one of the first of our kind in the world. And there's been some significant resistance, but that's okay. We knew that going into that this wasn't going to be an easy ask. In fact, the chances of us not being successful were quite high, just because of the ingrained culture and how we do corrections. Our team is still small and mighty. We're up to 15 now, whether it's paid or volunteers. In fact, we're having a new volunteer that just joined the team. But we take people on the team for specific skill sets right now. Because of making sure that we're well-rounded in our ability, to affect change. So we're a bit of a disruptors in the space, which is I know disruptor is a bit of a powerful word, but the reality is we're innovators, we're creative, we're purpose-driven, and we're seeing more and more interest and traction in who we are. For us, once we get 1 or 2 facilities and we're outcomes based, so somebody independent of us is going to measure us as compared to what the government does, not us. And once we show that this humanity-based model is more effective for safety and security and helping human beings, we're going to significantly grow. The problem with a brand new idea that's never existed before is people see us as risk, and leaders are risk averse. They don't want to look bad, specifically if they have political motivations. And so it's been a challenge. We're 5 years old. We've had some small projects. We have some big projects coming online that I can't talk about yet. But yeah, I mean, if you're interested in challenging the status quo and the assumptions and corrections, take a look at our website, which you have up there. Thank you, on your screen. Take a look at what we're doing. If you have the means, we are a 501c3. So in the U.S., that's a tax exempt nonprofit. So there, if you have the means, donate to us, help us get established. It's hard. Leaving a warden's chair, I thought, well, this is an easy idea. People are going to donate. No, raising money is hard. It is hard. It's harder than running a prison. I'll just tell you that. And running a prison.
If you're raising money easy, you're doing something wrong.
But support us. Don't even if you're not interested in supporting us specifically, calling your legislatures and say, tell me what you're doing with corrections. What are your outcomes? Why are we spending this much money as a taxpayer, and what is that return on our investment? How are we treating people while they're incarcerated, and ethically, is that right or wrong? I think the better we can start educating general society, especially the voters, about corrections, and start to make it a priority for our government leaders to pay attention to it, to fund it, to support it, we're not going to see any changes. So if you're not happy with the status quo on the corrections front, please take that initiative, and ask the right questions and encourage the decision makers to make this a priority. This is about the people of your country. This is important.
Absolutely. And Brian, what final message would you have for the listeners tonight?
I'm thankful for being here. We are not going to fix this problem alone. If you're listening to this, and you're intrigued by what we're doing, please reach out to me direct. I love to have a conversation with anyone who's interested. Or if you're not in the United States, if you're outside the United States and you want ideas on how to help your home country's correction systems, they're not all that different. We're happy to help. So reach out if you're interested. Take that initiative. Together we can make a difference. And the reality is divided, we're going to have challenges. So yeah.
Well, I want to really thank you, Brian, for sharing this tonight with us and getting this information out there, because this is the kind of conversations we need to start having, is these open heart, real raw conversations about human beings. Brian, if you could just spell out your website for the audio listeners so they can check out the website, and then I'm going to just do a quick wrap up of what tonight's tea time was.
Thank you, Miss Liz. It's spcor.org. So socialpurposecorrections.org, spcor.org. If you put it in AI, it'll find us right away, or if you Google search it too.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to the listeners out there. And thank you for the people joining in and bringing your questions and comments. I could not do this without all of you guys. This is why we do tea, and we serve real raw tea at this table. So tonight's conversation was a real and necessary conversation. Brian, thank you for bringing truth to the table, not the polished version, but the lived one. You reminded us that real change doesn't come with applause. It comes with resistance, discomfort, and the decision to stay when walking away would be easier. Tonight, we were reminded that systems don't change unless people do, and that leadership is not about control. It's about accountability, consistency, and the willingness to invest in others, even when it's hard. Your work shows us that when we focus on people, truly focus on them, we create environments where growth, responsibility, and transformation can actually happen. Here is something to carry with you after this tea time. Where in your life are you being called to stay, do the hard work, and lead, even when it's uncomfortable? Because real impact doesn't come from what looks good on paper. It comes from what we choose to build fix, and stand in day after day. Until our next cup, keep sharing, keep showing up, and keep doing the work, and keep choosing purpose over comfort. And I'll see everybody next week, and we'll do this all over again.